It's my great pleasure to welcome my guests to our panel discussion, our NeuRA Talks panel discussion on pain today. Pain is really something universal that so many of us suffer from, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your different and new insights into how we can manage it better today. So thank you very much for joining me.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
James, I might start with you,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of your areas of research is low back pain in particular,
Yeah.
and particularly understanding how we can retrain the brain so that pain is perceived differently. What are the implications of that for treatment and outcomes, and how is that different for both patients and health practitioners?
Sure. So there's a lot in that. So
You can unpack it.
So if I guess that for me, I always like to try and start a little bit at the beginning in terms of what I was originally interested in when I first became involved in back pain research. So the back pain is although I'm interested in different types of chronic pain, back pain is the one that I have a major focus on, major research focus on. When I first started research, I was working with a group who were very interested in investigating some of the standard therapies or the more traditional therapies that you might receive if you go and see a doctor or a chiropractor or a physiotherapist. So these are things like medicines and manual therapy. Manual therapy is, most people have probably experienced manual therapy somehow. If they've had back pain, someone presses on your spine on different parts of it to try and loosen up the vertebra of the spine. Also exercise as well. So the idea is that if you exercise, then that might help you if you've had back pain. So we were really interested in whether or not these therapies worked actually when you tested them in high quality clinical trials, because that provides the best evidence of whether or not a therapy is effective or not. And so we designed a whole series of studies looking at these different interventions, and were really surprised when the results came in that showed that actually most of these interventions provide, well, really a very small effect compared to doing nothing or compared to a sham treatment, for example, or a pretend treatment. They provide a very small effect, and if you're thinking about a 10-point scale of pain intensity, where 0 is no pain and 10 is the worst possible pain you can imagine, they provide about a less than a 1-point difference on that scale compared to doing nothing. So I think this kind of like really surprised us and the rest of the research, the back pain research community and clinicians as well. And I was kind of like thrown a bit through a hoop on that. And I was wondering, well, what do we do about this? So there was a colleague of mine at the time working here at Neuroscience Research Australia, and I came to work here with him to think about different ways of developing new treatments. He was very interested, and I guess that most people here are interested in the brain and the nervous system. And we became interested in how the pain system of someone who's had back pain for a long time, the system that generates this feeling, this painful feeling, changes the longer you have pain. And we developed a series of interventions along with some colleagues from Western Australia. Professor Ben Wand developed a series of interventions that we put those together in a package, and then we tested that package against a pretend package in a randomized controlled clinical trial. We found that there was an effect. We found that we were able to help people by retraining their pain system to not be as active to generate this feeling over time. So we ended up finding that we could do this. It produced an effect at the short term, and it also produced an effect, really excitingly, I think, at the long term. So over long term, we're able to get people back to their normal activities, and that was a sustained effect. So we're pretty happy about that. It went all the way from investigating drugs, whether or not paracetamol works, whether or not NSAIDs work, now all the way through to a completely new paradigm, a new way of treating back pain. So we're pretty excited, I guess, about where this has led us.
And as I recall, that's a multi-modality program, isn't it? You don't just do one thing.
No, that's right. There are several different things that we do. And one of the myths about back pain, I guess, that's really been a barrier to a lot of people who have back pain is worrying so much about what's happening in their back. I mean, it's understandable. I mean, you have back pain and you're, okay, there's something happening in my back and I should be careful about that. I shouldn't move in a particular way because it's going to make things worse. It might actually damage me if I move. And specifically, you hear people a lot of the time talking about like a slip disc or something, and that doesn't really make any sense from an anatomical perspective. You can't slip a disc. And there's been some really interesting research from some colleagues of ours in Germany where they did scans of people's backs, imaging of people's backs. And have you had back pain before?
I have actually.
You have.
I'm just thinking of myself as well.
There's probably a lot of the people who are listening probably have had back pain or have it now. If I scanned their back, I'd find all sorts of things wrong with their back. Little disc protrusions, little bony ossifications, all sorts of things. Disc height shrunk. If you look at my back, you see the same stuff, and I don't have back pain. So this massive study in Germany looked at whether or not there's any of these findings about the disc, are they associated with developing long-term back pain? And they're just not. So all of this stuff about your back, and I can understand why people are worried about what's happening in their back, but actually we take a much broader perspective. So we're also interested in what's happening in the spinal cord and also what's happening in your brain. And then also what's happening in your brain that pushes down through the spinal cord into your back. So the whole system is something that we think has become maladaptive. It's adjusted over time to creating more pain and more pain. And our treatments are really about trying to calm that down and trying to make sure that the system, or trying to intervene to make the system less responsive to things that aren't actually dangerous, so that if someone wants to move, they can move freely again without worrying about damaging their back or experiencing more pain.
James, it's interesting you say slip disc. I mean, even the language is quite scary.
Yes.
Yeah. I've got a slip disc. How could I possibly jump in the pool?
Yeah.
That disc may slip further.
Yeah.
Or protrusion, or your disc has collapsed or it's shrunk.
Yeah.
The language is frightening.
That's exactly right. And it's not just, that's exactly right. And it's frightening. That's the ideal point here, really, because it's also could it possibly get better?
That's right.
Unless someone goes in and chops it out, or someone does something to it, or pushes it back in somehow. So that language is super important because it creates this fear, and then it makes everything else seem more dangerous around you.
That's right.
So the more danger you perceive in your environment, the more dangerous you think movements are, unfortunately, the worse the pain becomes. So that's really what our therapies are about. There's several different types of tricks that we use, or different types of therapies that we use to make sure that the brain is no longer evaluating really safe, actually to make sure that the person understands, the brain understands that they're in a safe space, that it's not a dangerous space.
Not a threat.
Not
right?
a threat,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Robert, actually, I might jump to you now a little bit sooner than I was intending to, but it's great to get your perspective as somebody that has been part of this RESOLVE trial of Professor Macaulay. So what was your experience like, originally in terms of your low back pain? And what did you learn through the trial? How did things change?
Look, I suffered chronic back pain, and it was severe. I would walk down the stairs and I was in pain. I would go to the pool and do my exercise and I was in pain. And it's constant pain of, overbearing sciatica for many years, and then it's
So down one leg?
Down one leg,
Yeah.
yep. And then it's almost like it's stuck in my brain that, slip disc, sciatica, my nerve is pinched. What do I do? And I need major intervention. And it's that safe space that Professor James talks about, is that you can actually let go of things. And once you start to let go, once you start to challenge yourself and say, no, I can move my back freely. It's really funny, when I first walked into the research program, I was quite stiff. And I asked one of the researchers, Aidan, I said, do you think I'll ever be able to run again? He's like, what? What do you mean run again? What's wrong with you? And we started to do these series of exercises where I was like a belly dancer. And I remember he goes, just move your hips. And my whole body was moving because I was almost, it was a behavior that I sort of unlearned because I was so stiff. So during the treatment and post the treatment, I started to let go. I started to understand things about brain smudging or being oversensitive about a particular spot, how my brain, has these protective mechanisms to sort of help me adapt, which were really not doing me any good. So once I started to free myself from that, I started to live a normal life.
Yeah. And that process of change, what Robert's absolutely beautifully described there, is something that's a fundamental part of this therapy, that the nervous system can change and we can help it to change. And we do that by, for example, as Robert said, there are specific movements that we might do. We also show people that, for example, if I touched, when Robert had back pain, if I was able to touch Robert on his back, he probably wouldn't be able to tell me accurately where I was touching him. That's a really good sign that the processing of signals that are coming from the back into the brain are being processed in a different way. And over time, we can train that. And then the brain starts to understand that, and then Robert is able to express that it's safe for him to move. And if we can trick the brain into doing that, or persuade the brain into doing that, of believing that, then change follows and Robert's pain decreased.
And that's the big one, teaching the brain. If I could I remember this really good scenario where Aidan asked me to sort of lie down on my back and do a sit-up. And you're talking to an ex-rugby player here. I played rugby, I did sit-ups, I did all sorts of things. But for many years, I was using my bedpost to get out of bed. So I'd forgotten how to do a sit-up. So I was there on flat and I'm like, I don't know how to do a sit-up. He goes, just give me a sit-up. And I'm like, I don't know how to. And he said, that's really interesting. He said, just do this for me. Over the next few days, put both your hands, palm facing on the floor, and just give me that exercise and see how you go. So I went home thinking, this is really strong. I can't do a sit-up. So I started doing this, and 3 days later, I was able to do a sit-up. So I went back, I said, Aidan, I can do a sit-up. He goes, show me. And I did it, and I went, ow. He goes, what? I go, that's a little bit painful. He goes, do it again. And within a week, I was doing 20 sit-ups, and there was no more pain.
And it's super interesting what Robert just said, because what he did and what Aidan helped him do was understand, and through a lot of education and a lot of examples of the way how backs are actually stronger than you think, and actually it's really difficult to harm them, and discs probably aren't a cause of back pain for the vast majority of people. But through all of that education and thinking about the nervous system as the system that generates the pain and how that can be controlled and how that can be changed as well, those are the things that help Robert, I think. That's the intention was anyway, to help Robert understand that, in fact, doing sit-ups is not going to damage him and it's not going to harm him. And in fact, the more that you do that, the less pain that you'll feel.
Exactly.
So where are you heading, last question for you, James, into from here? Just a question from one of our supporters. What's your next frontier in terms of pain research?
Well, one of the things that's happened in the last few years, I used to sit in my ivory tower in NeuRA and come up with research ideas and think, let's see what we can do with this, right? And then, absolutely completely fair enough, the funders have now said, this is not good enough. You have to, if you find something, you can't just publish and walk away and expect other people to take it on. It's your responsibility to implement that into clinical practice and make sure that that is actually going to help patients. That's my responsibility. And that is absolutely, completely fair, and it's an exciting time for us because that's the next step of this research. We've just received some funding. Aidan, in fact, is the chief investigator on that grant. So he's just received some funding to implement this research. So we're about to start training clinicians. We've developed a training package. So we'll train clinicians how to deliver this completely new type of therapy. And then we hope that we'll measure whether or not patients are still doing as well, and we hope that they are. And that's the next step of our research. The second part of that is to take what we've done for back pain and adapt it for other types of chronic pain.
I was going to ask you that. Neck, shoulder?
Well, we have a funded project starting on necks. We have one using exactly the same approach, and Sylvia's involved in this as well, for complex regional pain syndrome, which is a really terrible pain syndrome. It's very poorly understood, where people, suicide rates are very high. So we've adapted it for the people to help people with that condition. And then finally, for people with phantom limb pain, because again, this is something that, that you might think, well, phantom limb pain is so odd because you don't have an arm, but you can feel the pain in your arm. It's almost where some of these research came from, because it's clear that it can't be coming from the arm in the same way that your pain, it might start in the back, but it's the system that's generating the pain. That's clearly what's happening to somebody who has phantom limb pain. And so we've adapted this, back translated, and we're starting a trial for people with phantom limb pain as well. Also, we've also got kids on the horizon, because chronic pain is very serious with kids. We've got kids on the horizon. And
kids or adolescents?
So when I say kids, I mean adolescents. Okay. That's exactly right. Yeah, so adolescents with chronic pain as well. So those are the kind of the major directions that we're taking.
Fascinating. All right, Sylvia, we'll come to you next. James has given us a great segue. So your interest in particular, I think, at least this is where you started. You've probably travelled on since then, but initially was to investigate chronic pain using neuroimaging techniques such as MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. What attracted you initially to this field?
Yeah, since I was little, I was immersed into science and technology. But it was actually the brain which sparked my passion, and the brain is an extraordinary organ, and it's dynamic, and we can actually change the function in a way to recover from neurological and mental health disorders. And what James said before, we know that the brain is key in the development and maintenance of chronic pain. And one way to research the brain is using a technique called magnetic resonance imaging. And with this technique, we can delve deep into the brain and understand why people develop chronic pain. And our research here at the Center for Pain Impact, we showed the key areas in the brain which are involved in the development and maintenance of chronic pain. And these are the motor cortex, the thalamus, which sits in the middle of the brain, but also the medial prefrontal cortex. And based on these discoveries, we are developing and testing new brain technology in digital treatments. And one of them is virtual reality, and this is actually where Stuart was our participant. So basically really using the knowledge we created here and trying to normalize, re-alter these brain changes in a way which reduces pain.
So is the virtual reality trial targeting one of those three particular areas or all of them?
Yeah, exactly. So the virtual reality trial is targeting the motor cortex, because what we found is that in people who have developed nerve pain after spinal cord injury, such as Stuart, we have shown that this particular area has shrunk in the brain. And shrunk. And what we want to do is basically to target this brain area, that this area is increasing again. And the way we do it is we are tricking the brain. We are tricking the brain in a way that the brain thinks that is real by using immersive virtual reality, so that the brain thinks I'm really walking, I'm really touching, I'm solving puzzles. And by tricking the brain, hopefully the idea is really to change the function of the brain in a way to reduce pain.
That's so interesting. So what is it about chronic pain that makes that area actually shrink?
One of the reasons definitely because Stuart can't feel and can't walk. So it's a very natural reason. But and the brain is dynamic. But also in people who have developed neuropathic pain, what we know is that the area has shrunk more. This is a $1,000 question. Why has it shrunk more? And we still need to do a lot of research, but we know it has shrunk more. And the only way really to increase it is basically really change the function of the brain, which we know we can do it because the brain is dynamic.
Stuart, I understand that you've been a sufferer of neuropathic pain, right? And this affects about 60% of people, at least with spinal cord injury. What is that like?
It's disheartening to start with. I had a brain injury at the same time as I had the motorcycle accident. So I now have a much better understanding of what neuropathic pain is. And unlike Robert, my pain won't go away. If my brain stays as it is, the pain's never going to go away. It's not going to get worse. Well, I hope it'll never get worse, but I can't damage it anymore. It's just the signals my brain is sending to the other part of the brain. So I can't, as Robert did, he went back to the gym to do his sit-ups and he could do that, whereas I know I can't walk, end of story. But the pain's not going to get worse.
How would you describe it, neuropathic pain?
How to describe it? It's interesting because the pain I suffer it's like, if you can imagine sitting on a concrete, well, I'd call it bleachers, like stands and things like that, for 3 or 4 hours, and your butt gets really sore. That's how I feel all the time. Like I'm 24/7, or when I say 24/7, my waking hours, I feel like that across my butt. So that's just a constant. But because I know it's not going to get any worse, and it's my brain playing tricks on the other parts of the brain, it is what it is. So you learn to live with it. So chronic, yes, it's chronic, but B, it's not going to get worse. So it is what it is. So.
Okay, so then in terms of your participation in this virtual reality trial, what was that like?
That was really, really interesting because of the fact that I'd never put a set of goggles on before in my life. So it was interesting to put it on and learn what virtual reality is about. And one of the things that I found really enjoyable, more enjoyable than the rest of it, was being in a huge hall and walking upstairs, which was fantastic because you could walk around paddocks and things like that, but that was fine. But to walk upstairs was unbelievable and it was fantastic. So it was really, really heartening to think that in the future, people who suffer what I've suffered in terms of a spinal injury, they may be able to get back to walking and their brain's going to be healthy again. So it's just, yeah.
Stuart, did it feel real for you though? Like walking up the stairs, did it feel like I've got the goggles on and I'm just doing this pretending, or did it actually feel soulful and real?
It's interesting you say that because walking around the paddocks and the up mountains and things like that, there's a bit of that going on. Right. But then when I got into this room, it was like a big hall and had stairs and decks that went around the top. It almost felt real. It was really enthusiastically walking. You found yourself enthusiastically walking up the stairs. Wow. And it was really mind-blowing. So it was very good, yeah.
So Sylvia, while this is going on, you're monitoring with EEG, the brain response, is that correct?
Yeah, we are monitoring with EEG, but also we do magnetic resonance imaging to understand why people recover. But what I also would like to say that this is actually house-made. So this is not a software which you can purchase over the counter. So we actually developed, it's an in-house built software, and particularly for people who have developed nerve pain after spinal cord injury.
It's just, we're still at the very beginning,
yeah.
I think. And it's I can see an ending. There's going to be some real good come out of it. And it's going to be literally mind-blowing. And it's all about the brain. So it's very, very exciting to be a part of it and to see what Professor Guston is doing about it all and the team. It's fantastic, it really is.
Well, to achieve good and to return that good to society is what we're all here to do.
Yeah.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.